So yesterday, there's a big story that went around, and it's worth debunking because it went viral. And that is that some NYPD officers say they were poisoned at a Shake Shack. Basically, what they said is that there were 3 officers who were handed drinks full of bleach. It turns out the people just hadn't cleaned the machine properly. They did an investigation. The people hadn't cleaned the machine properly. It is good to knock down those narratives. So now the entire media have decided that the NYPD as a whole is bad. The NYPD as a whole is mean, and they tell false stories because of all this. So, in other words, these guys were given cups with bleach in them, and then they drank it, and they said, this tastes like bleach, and they had to go to the hospital. And they suspected that it may have been purposeful given all the anti-cop stuff. And it turns out not to have been purposeful. Now the NYPD is very bad. But all the people who attack the NYPD are good. Okay, so the NYPD is now going to disband its plainclothes anti-crime unit. So, by the way, the crime rates in these big cities are just going to spike. They're going to spike dramatically and obviously. That is the next thing to happen here. The New York Post reports the NYPD is disbanding its undercover anti-crime unit after being involved in a quote-unquote disproportionate number of shootings. The roughly 600 cops spread out at precincts and PSAs across the city will be reassigned into other posts, including the Detective Bureau and Neighborhood Police, the city's top cop said. Now, one of the reasons you have plainclothes police is because you actually don't want people knowing all the time that the cops are there. It's the same reason the cops hide behind hedges when they're policing traffic. Because if you see the cop, then you stop committing the crime preemptively, or you just go to another area and commit the crime. And plainclothes cops mean you don't know who the cops are, so presumably, if you suspect that there are lots of cops around, you're not going to do what you want to do in terms of criminal activity. But apparently, this is very bad. So they're getting rid of the plainclothes cops unit, which of course is definitely going to not result in higher crime or anything. NYPD Commissioner Dermot Shea said, this is 21st century policing, intelligence data, shot spotter, video DNA, and building prosecutable cases. It continues to be building these cases on a small number of people that unfortunately still terrorize a part of the city. I would consider this in the realm of closing on one of the last chapters on stop, question, and frisk. Shea said, when you look at the number of anti-crime officers that operate within New York City, and you look at a disproportionate, quite frankly, percentage of complaints and shootings, and they are doing exactly what was asked of them, it will be felt immediately throughout the 5 districts' attorney's office. It will be felt immediately in the communities that we protect. There's a policy shift coming from me personally and men and women in the police department. We're doing what I asked before me asked. They've done an exceptional job. I think it's time to move forward and change how we police in the city. Well, good luck with that. We will see how changes in the policing of New York result in more crime. We talked yesterday about a study from Harvard by Roland Fryer talking about the fact that 5 police departments were investigated after a case of a homicide saw a dramatic increase in the amount of murder in those cities in the direct aftermath of those investigations because cops knew the story and they were like, you know what? Not going to go out of my way here. Not going to go out of my way. I'll respond to a 911 call. I'm not going to preemptively walk the streets looking for crime. So NYPD is now doing all of that. Meanwhile, Seattle has decided a great idea would be to ban crowd control weapons. So you can't use tear gas anymore. By the way, I think it is worth distinguishing here between chokeholds and suppression holds, right? There's a difference. So people are saying that chokeholds should be banned. Chokeholds have been banned in most major police departments. A chokehold is where you go for the trachea, right? Chokehold is where you actually try to cut off somebody's supply of air. A suppression hold, as I was taught by Stephen Crowder when he actually used one on me, cuts off the supply of oxygen to the brain by basically cutting off your blood supply, right? Essentially what you're doing is you're not cutting off someone's supply of air, which is incredibly dangerous and they will die. A suppression hold is you cut off oxygen to the brain and it knocks them out for a specific period of time. You start to lose consciousness. Well, now the Seattle City, I'm wondering how they expect people to suppress criminals. I really don't know. They're making policing, like, don't call it, if you want to ban chokeholds, go for it. But like, let's be specific about what it is you're banning. Are you also banning the ability of cops to use jujitsu moves that suppress suspects if they're being violent? Right? So now you can't suppress the guy. You can't knock the guy out. Instead, what do? I mean, you can't wail on him because that's assault, right? You also can't suppress the guy. You can put a knee on his back, I suppose, but if he's conscious, then he can knock you off. Right? Like this is all making policing incredibly unworkable. Somebody should talk to a cop before they change the cop policies. Like, wouldn't it behoove Joe Biden to talk to a cop before he says things like, just shoot the guy in the leg? What the hell does Joe Biden know about policing? In fact, what do most U.S. senators know about policing? The answer is virtually nothing. Seattle City Council is going even further. They are now pushing to get rid of the ability for the police to use tear gas and pepper spray and other crowd control devices, which makes perfect sense because you literally have a 6-block area of Seattle that is now called CHOP, because they changed it from Chaz to CHOP, that has been taken over by protesters. And by the way, people who are spray painting every business surface in the area. You have that, but you can't disperse the crowd. In a 9-0 vote Monday, they voted to get rid of both chokeholds as well as tear gas and pepper spray. 1 week ago, Seattle Police Officer Guild President Mike Solon said criminal agitators had taken over recent peaceful demonstrations, throwing bottles, rocks, cinder blocks, metal objects, and incendiary devices at police officers. He added that officers had been injured as a result. In regards to tear gas deployed in the early morning hours of June 8th in the Capitol Hill neighborhood, Solon said that is a less lethal tool that is effective in restoring public order. See, this is the thing. You get rid of things like tear gas. What do you think is going to happen when the police have to disperse somebody? They can no longer use the tear gas, which is you fire tear gas in an area, it makes people cry and choke up, and then they have to leave. As opposed to, now you can't use that. So what? You got police officers waiting in there with a baton? Like, how does this make things better? Unless you're just abandoning the area of the city completely, as they have. I mean, as Seattle Police Chief Carmen Best, who, by the way, is a woman of color, said, it has been historically known through the evidence and other research that the use of CS gas, otherwise known as tear gas, can often be a less lethal way of dispersing a crowd without having to go hands-on, without using our riot batons. So it has been determined to be less dangerous to do that. That said, it has been very clear that people don't want us to use CS. Well, people just don't want you to police. So they're not just going to disband the police. They're just going to make it impossible for people to police. Meanwhile, how much media coverage has there been of the police officers who've been injured over the past several weeks? And we were talking about dozens of police officers injured, including some who are dead. Have you heard the story of Shay Michelonis? I hadn't. A Las Vegas police officer shot in the head during an anti-racism protest that turned violent. He's now paralyzed from the neck down. He's 29. He was shot during an altercation that broke out following a mostly peaceful protest down the Las Vegas Strip on June 1st. By the way, I do love how the media, I mean, that's Daily Wire, taking that media coverage from other places like CBS News. Can you imagine a Tea Party protest that erupts into violence and a cop gets shot in the head and is now paralyzed being described as a mostly peaceful protest? Can you imagine that? Of course you cannot. Can you imagine an anti-lockdown protest where a single person gets shot and them saying, oh, well, you know, it's a mostly peaceful protest. Mostly peaceful. Mostly peaceful. It's like being a little bit pregnant. Las Vegas police, who have a suspect in custody related to the shooter, appear to believe that he was targeted because he was an in-uniform officer. A 20-year-old man deliberately shot Michelonis during the protest, one of hundreds being held across the nation. The guy who did the shooting took out a gun and fired at officers. He's charged with attempted murder, battery, and firearms charges being held in lieu of $1 million. According to Michelonis' family, Shay's on a ventilator and will remain so. He's paralyzed from the neck down, unable to speak. He's awake, seems to recognize his family members. So, well done, everybody, because the only shootings in America that matter are the ones that people in the media say matter. Not the shootings of a perfectly innocent police officer who's now paralyzed from the waist, from the head down, from the neck down. Instead, the focus must all be on this shooting in Atlanta where a man knocked over two cops, stole a taser, and tried to fire a taser at an officer before being shot. This man is now apparently a brutal racist, according to the entirety of the mainstream media. CNN's Bakari Sellers, commentator, he says that Rashard Brooks was murdered point blank. Murdered point blank. This is a perfectly justified shoot. I talked to a bunch of cops. You cannot tell cops that if someone steals your taser and tries to tase you, that you're supposed to stand there and take it. Because after all, it's a non-deadly weapon. I mean, yeah, except that after they shoot you with the taser, what do you think they are going to do? What do you think they are going to do? They've already demonstrated they're fine with taking a weapon off a cop. You're now a cop who's prone. Does this sound like a good plan to you? According to CNN, it does. I love all these people who are real experts on policing, noting what is and is not good police procedure. It really is a wonderland of newfound police expertise. Here's Bakari Sellers saying that Rashard Brooks was murdered point blank. Murdered point blank. Again, we showed you the tape yesterday. He was in an open conversation with two cops for 25 minutes while they attempted to get him to submit to arrest and attempted to work out a solution with him. They called backup. They did all the right things. He was still, quote unquote, murdered. This means you just don't want cops to exist, basically. Here's Bakari Sellers on CNN.
This is as clear as you can get. I mean, he was murdered, period, point blank, period. I think the autopsy called it homicide. And I watch people bend over backwards, and they're going to bend over backwards after this segment on social media, et cetera, and say, well, you know, he shouldn't have struggled with the police. He shouldn't have been drinking while driving. He shouldn't have run. He even fired the taser back at the police. Well, you know, Wolf, none of those are death penalty crimes. And so here we are again.
Well, I mean, attempted murder isn't a death penalty crime either. A murder is a death penalty crime. It turns out that the standards for what a cop is supposed to take do not include being tased in the face. That is not something that a cop is supposed to stand there and take. Not a single cop is trained for this sort of stuff. And by the way, if you try to train cops to say, oh yeah, if somebody takes out your taser and tries to tase you, you basically are supposed to just, you know, the guy's taser was gone, by the way. Like, what exactly is the cop supposed to do at that point? The guy's got his taser. He's firing the taser at him. So presumably what? Is he supposed to just try and tackle him when the other guy has the taser? That's the way this works now? You're making policing utterly, it's just not practical. I mean, there's no way to have a police force this way. There's no wonder I'm getting calls from police officers all over the country saying, I'm out. I'm out. The crime wave that's going to come in the aftermath of this is going to be extraordinary. It's going to be an extraordinary crime wave in the aftermath of this in major cities. CNN's Chris Cuomo, who obviously knows he knows about as much about policing as Chris Cuomo knows about the Constitution, which is to say nothing. And about as much as about this as he knows about practical policies for preventing COVID, which apparently includes bathing in bleach, according to his wife. Here was Chris Cuomo yesterday suggesting the arresting officers had poor technique. I'm definitely going to listen to this block of wood about arresting technique because I think that he's probably an expert on police procedure.
I see poor technique, and that matters in this analysis. If you can't do your job using minimal force, you wind up using more and more force. Hence, 2 officers not being able to control in a struggle that anybody who's had any measure of fight training sees, they don't know what they're doing on the ground with this man. They don't. I'm sorry. No disrespect to police. I have high regard for how many of you do the job, men and women. This is not good technique.
No, it's not good technique. Chris Cuomo is now the arbiter of good technique. He's grappling. I mean, can we also point out here that if the officers had used a suppression hold and something bad had happened to the man, you would have called it murder, right? This would be this would have been a good scenario to use a suppression hold, right? The guy's rolling around with cops trying to steal their weapon. This would have been a good opportunity to maybe knock him out using a suppression hold, but you would then call it a chokehold and call it murder if something bad happened from a secondary health condition. So cops, it's a no-win scenario for cops. And you're going to completely botch the coverage of the situation because you have to come up with some reason that the cop is wrong here. Trevor Noah, again, another police expert, he says the sober one should have de-escalated. They tried to de-escalate with this guy for 25 minutes. 25 minutes. The tape is like 40 minutes long total. Trevor Noah blaming the cops, of course, because the cops are always to blame. Man, the aftermath of this is going to be so ugly because it turns out that when you tell police officers they can't do their job, guess what they do? They don't do their job. They leave them. They leave the jobs. Here's Trevor Noah.
People say he shouldn't have resisted. Yeah, he's drunk. I'm not excusing his act, but he's drunk. In a situation like that, the sober person, in my opinion, the onus is upon them to make sure the situation doesn't get out of hand. You're sober. He's drunk. How are 2 sober men wrestling with a drunk person on the ground? How does it get that far? How does it end with him losing his life?
It ends with him losing his life because he stole a taser off a cop and tried to shoot the cop with the taser. This is not difficult. But again, the goal here is there's an in-group and an out-group. If you're a part of the out-group, and that now includes cops, then you are simply deemed not woke enough no matter what you do. And so anything is justified against you, including maybe murder charges. They're not talking about murder charges for this cop. I swear, you'd have to be a dullard to go into policing at this point in time. Seriously, like I have nothing but admiration for people going into policing, but I don't know how a sane and rational person could look at this climate and think to themselves, you know what, I want to be a cop right now. And in fact, I don't know many cops who are thinking that they want to stay cops right now, given the climate in America's major cities. Facts don't care about your feelings, and it's a fact that The Ben Shapiro Show is the largest conservative podcast in the nation. Be sure to hit the subscribe button to stay up to date on all of our content.